Hey everybody, it's Maria from cardbomb.com. I'm so happy to have you joining me today as I create another fun project for Tonic Studios. Today I will be making a Gatefold card using two stamp sets from the recent garden party release. We will be using this stamp set from the Botanical Burst and this banner from the Celebrate Sentiments. Now I've already got my stamp on my Tonic stamping platform, and I'm going to start by stamping that with my clear mark ink onto watercolor paper. I'm pouring the Nuvo Fine Detail Gold Embossing Powder onto it and heat setting that with my heat tool. Once I've got that done, I'm going to flip the paper around and do the exact same process on the other side so that I will have two of these beautiful images heat embossed in gold. Here's what they look like when I'm done, and let's get started with some watercoloring. For today's watercoloring, I decided to use Tonic Studio's Nuvo Aqua pens. I love these pens because you can use them in a variety of different ways. You can use the pens directly on your watercolor paper and use a water pen to move the ink around, or you can apply the ink to, for example, here I'm applying it to my Tim Holtz Media Mat, and then pick up the color with a water brush pen and use the paint that way. So that's my personal favorite way to do it. I do go directly to the paper sometimes, and you will see that I do that later on in this video. So I've started by coloring in the leaves with Sliced Kiwi and Empress Teal inks, and the first thing that I did was use my water brush to put a little bit of water down onto the paper. When you do that, it helps your color move smoothly and it helps your colors to blend. I like to start with my lighter color first and then slowly add the darker color. This helps me make sure that I'm going to have some contrast in my work. So for example, if you look at the larger leaves that I did first, I used the lighter green, which is Sliced Kiwi, and then as I got closer to the flowers where there would be some darker shadows, I added in some Empress Teal to make it look darker. After I used the Sliced Kiwi and the Empress Teal, I decided that I wanted to add some fall colored leaves. So I watercolored some of the leaves in tomato juice. To get the variation in color, I just used different amounts of water on each of those leaves. I'm still using tomato juice, but on those tiny little bulbs, I used a lot more water so that the color would be more faint. I will go in after this with some darker colors to add some shadows, and that helps create a lot of contrast. The darker colors that I'm using are Caramel Pecan and Rustic Oak, but you can see that before I added in my browns, I did try to get more color variation with the tomato juice orange color. So here I go with the browns. I'm about to add some of that over on the side of the camera, and you can see that that makes a big difference. Because these little bulbs are small, I was really worried that the brown, the darker colors were going to bleed into the orange and take over the whole thing, and I really wanted to make sure that the top of those little bulbs held their orange color. So you can see that I keep going in with a paper towel to mop up the excess water and make sure that the colors didn't bleed together too much. So this is one of those places where it would be important to know that when your whole image is wet, the colors really bleed together, but that if that first base layer color is a little bit dry, you can set the second layer of color on top without having them bleed so much. So that's why I was trying to keep that dry so that the second layer wouldn't bleed into the first color. After I was happy with the color that I'd gotten on those bulbs, I moved on to watercoloring my flowers. I quickly mopped up the watercolors that I had been using, and I laid down some Hawaiian Orchid ink. That's what I'm using now to color this flower, and this is one of my favorite colors for flowers. Right now I'm using a lot of water so that the color will be light. Later on in this video though, I do decide that I want it to be a lot darker, and I will go back in with more of this Hawaiian Orchid as well as some of the purple color. The purple that I find myself reaching for most often is called Indigo Dawn, and that is a color that I'm switching to right now. So I've got some of that on my media mat off to the side, and I'm doing the same technique where I'm just adding water to the flower and adding ink into that water and spreading it around. I'm using my paper towel again when I have a little bit too much ink or a little bit too much water so that I can continue to get contrast and variation in color. Over on the left now, I'm using Aqua Splash to color in this newest flower. This is a color that I love to use too, and one of the reasons that I'm picking these colors, the pink, the purple, and the blue, is because they blend together really, really well. So sometimes you want to tie all of the colors in your image together in a cohesive way, and it's really easy to do this in flowers when you pick colors that blend well. So you'll see as I move on that I'll color one of the flowers pink, but later on I'll go in and add some of that purple into it. You can see now that I'm combining the Aqua Splash and the light color of Hawaiian Orchid to make new colors, so that even though I'm using the same colors, I'm getting really different looks, but it's tying the whole image together because the colors all match and blend well together. I decided that I wanted to use some darker colors for the leaves in the background to try and set them back and make them look like they're shadowy. By doing that, I'm also helping the flower images pop forward more because the contrast between the floral images, which are lighter colored, and those dark leaves in the background really sets them apart. So now I'm using some other darker colors to continue to color those leaves in the background, but I am trying to get highlights at the tips of the leaves. So you'll notice that I am continuing to use darker color where the leaves are right behind the flower petals, and as those leaves extend outward on the image towards the light, I'm trying to color lighter colors so that it does show that they're picking up light and that they have highlights. Now I'm going back into the flower images and making them a little bit darker. I can do this now because those images have dried, and I'm now adding a second layer of color on top of the color I laid down initially. Remember, whenever your images are wet, the colors are just going to bleed together. It's going to be really difficult to get a layered look, and it's going to be really difficult to add much deeper, darker color if the image is still wet, because the colors are just going to keep blending. So by letting that first layer of color dry, it enables you to go back in with another color or even the same color and add a second layer of color that will sit on top, and you'll really start to see the difference in color when you do that. After I finished watercoloring, I cut my images out with my scissors and cut my card base to 5.5 by 8.5 inches, and I scored both sides at 2 1/8 inches on each side. I decided that I wanted to paint the front panels of my card with Nuvo Glacier paste. This is a product that recently came out and I haven't had a chance to use it yet, so I was pretty excited to give it a go. I decided to use it sparingly at first, but just was so surprised at how beautiful it was that I decided to end up going really heavy-handed. This goes on without texture. It's got a very smooth sheen, and it is so sparkly I could hardly believe it. Look at that. It dried very quickly, and I ended up taping my paper back down because I decided that I wanted to add some paint splatters with white acrylic paint. So after I did that, I was happy with the way that looked, and I wanted to see how my flowers were going to lay out on the front of that. I slid them together and realized that they interlock perfectly. So off camera, I heat embossed one of these banners in white embossing powder on black paper, and then I grabbed my Nuvo watercolor pencils and added some depth and some shadows to this. Now, of course, you can use these pencils wet because they're watercolor pencils, but you can also use them dry as I'm doing here just to add a little bit of shadow. You can always color on top of watercolor with these, and you can also use these in conjunction with the Nuvo alcohol markers. So I cut out my banner by hand and laid out my card just to see how it was going to look. First, I added foam adhesive to the left group of flowers and adhered that to the card front, making sure that it interlocked with that right flower image. Now I'm adding my foam adhesive to the right group of flowers, and they fit perfectly for a gatefold card front. It's really amazing. So now I'm using a clip at the top just to help me as I add my banner. I'm going to add foam adhesive to that banner, but when you do this, you have to remember that your card needs to open, so you can only put your adhesive on one side. I chose the left side, so when my card opens, you can see now that the banner is stuck to the left side. If you put it on both sides, you're going to glue your card front shut, so be careful not to do that. I wanted to add some more highlights to my card, so I went ahead and grabbed a white gel pen, and everywhere that I thought there should be some highlights or just little accents, I went ahead and I drew those in by hand, and it really does add a lot to the card. Here's a look at the finished card. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this video tutorial, I hope you might subscribe to me. If you're interested in any of the products that I've used today, there are links to everything and more information on my blog, links in the description box below. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.